Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of Chats from the Blog Cabin. You know, the show where I virtually invite people into the blog cabin to chat about life. And today we're chatting with David. David wrote The High Sign, which is about the end of times prophecy. So this is part of our Sunday inspirational series. So David, thank you for coming on and tell us a little bit about yourself before we get into about the book.
Most of my life I was a sports writer. And I had the best beats. I had the Yankees in spring training. I had the Cincinnati Reds for a while they were great World Series team. I did the University of Miami when they were winning national championships, the Dolphin Shula champions. And then kind of late in my life, I was almost ready for retirement. I got this, actually I had already gotten involved with doing the religion page. I created that, but still I went back to sports until late in my career. And then I had this experience. I'm reading Isaiah, book that I love, but never really understood very well. I get to Isaiah 6:8 and I'm looking at Isaiah prayed this weird prayer and then something good happened. So I said, okay. So I said, Lord, here am I, send me. And the next day, as I read through the book of Isaiah, it was like Isaiah was talking to me. I started to really understand the prophecy. And I'll tell you, it was kind of hair-raising. It was exciting. So for the last 16 years, I've been writing books about the end time. I think it's 6 or 7 now. But the High Sign has got to be the best one because on the online book club, they had a review, and the reviewer gave it double 4 stars, which is perfect. And my wife said it was her favorite book that I wrote. So that was the clincher. It had to be pretty good if she liked it, and this lady from the online book club liked it. I do think it is, and to me, it's an important book, and I think it can be to other people.
So let's talk about The High Sign. Let's talk about what led you to write it. You just said you prayed Isaiah 6:8. But what led you to finally say, okay, I'm going to share this with the world of what I think is going to happen or what the prophecy that's going to happen? And people are not going to look at me like I'm crazy.
Well, the pile of evidence is I'm reading through Isaiah, and then I continue on to the end of the scriptures. There's all of this end time imagery. And a lot of times it's called Day of the Lord, which is really, Jesus identifies this as the day of Jesus' return. And it's in the Old Testament, it's in the New Testament. A lot of times it's dual prophecy, which also refers to the present time or that time. But always it's looking ahead to the end time. And I got this pile of information. And I thought, well, yeah, I think it's time for me to share this. So I actually wrote another book before it. I'm trying to remember the name of it now. That was about 15 years ago. This one was much more recent. This is a pretty new book. Actually, it is a new book. It's not yesterday, but it's a new book. And I just think I find it very exciting. First of all, it's an optimistic thing. Even though Jesus prophesied tribulation, he said, "Don't worry about it. Don't be afraid. I'm going to shorten it." In other words, he's got it. So whatever else we talk about in this interview, we have to remember that he's got it. And it does get scary. It does get scary, but he's got it. And he also has work for us to do, because some of the people who do not understand what's going on are going to be terrified. And I know from experience that terrified people are open to the gospel. I've seen this happen 3 times, that people who became great ministers for the Lord did so because they got scared and they turned to him. So it's going to be an exciting time. It'll be scary, but as long as we remember that the Lord has got it, it will, for Christians, it will not be a terrifying thing.
So let's talk about some of the things that you said when people are faced with a great, terrifying things that you've seen it happen 3 times. Let's talk about some of those examples.
You want an example? Okay. Favorite example. Joan and I, my wife and I, got involved in D. James Kennedy's evangelism explosion. And we were in South Florida at the time, so we went to the church for a session of it, and Kennedy was teaching it. And we later became actually acquainted with him. We were in his church for a while. Great man. But the man he chose as his international director for EE was named Archie Parrish. It's not as familiar a name, but a great evangelist. And he trained us, Joan and me, and we learned a lot about him. He had been in the military, and he was in a battle. This was, I can't remember if it was Korea or World War II, but it was, I'm going to die. That's what it was. And he got so scared. Another soldier came up behind him who was not afraid, patted on the shoulder, on the head, said, "Don't worry about it," smiled, and went off. This guy was a Christian. And of course, Parrish didn't understand how he could, be not afraid. And Parrish went to a Christian pastor, the nearest church he could find, asked him, "Well, what is this about Jesus?" The pastor told him. He became saved. Obviously, Kennedy didn't appoint people who were not born again Christians. Mm-hmm. And he then had a ministry of his own of prayer that, until the time that he died, and that was not long ago. That was one of them. There were two others, but people get scared. Assistant pastor of a church I was at one time, he was afraid of going to hell. And he said, "I don't want to go to hell. I want to go to heaven." Got saved, became the assistant pastor, and helped Joan and me at a time when we had we nearly lost our home. Mm-hmm. And he walked up to me, handed me this envelope, said, "Here, the Lord told me to give you this." And it contained the exact sum that we needed for a mortgage payment on the day before they said they were going to foreclose. Mm. And this was another man who had been saved because, he got scared. He was afraid of going to hell. Getting scared is okay as long as you go to the right source to take care of it. And that source, of course, is Jesus. And these two men did. And I'll never forget either one of them.
So let's talk about how did you grow up in the church, or when did you start becoming to the point you already talked about you had the religious beat with writing as well, but when did you start with your really deep faith besides when you were reading Isaiah?
I think I was in a Lutheran church, and I think I had a faith. I don't know if it was a saving faith. I think it was pretty early, but I didn't really understand. The Lutherans are a little bit formal. Later on, I got acquainted with, through my work as the religion editor of the newspaper, I got acquainted with charismatics, and that was good. And I still love praising the Lord and worshiping God. I mean, that's great. And then there was Derek Prince and his group. There were others, and I just got exposed to everyone through that beat. Catholics, a Catholic priest was wonderful to us when Joan's father died. I think that was when I really started to get serious about the Lord, when I was the religion editor of the newspaper, because I was meeting all of these different people that were high in their denominations, and I think God is nodding his head and says, "Okay, this is your learning process, and we've got something else for you later on," because it was years later when I finally got started on the Heeren, my send me thing.
Wow, I love stories like that where God places people in your life to show you that, hey, this is where you need to be, or this is you're on this path now, and he places people to make sure that you know that you're on the correct path.
And absolutely, I have to amen that. I don't know what more to say than that. Just amen.
So we're going to have a brief commercial break, but when we come back, I want to talk more about the high signs and some of the prophecies that you found when you were reading Isaiah. So we're going to be right back after a brief commercial break.
Hi, my name is Joanna, and I would like to share with you a little bit about Shores of Grace, Shores Philly. It's a ministry located in Philadelphia. The portion of Shores that I volunteer for goes into Kensington, an area greatly impacted by homelessness and addiction. And we go and we take love, food, clothing, snacks, conversation. We believe that it is a way that we can meet people right where they are and show them the love of Jesus. We have seen lives changed in big ways and in small ways, and we have built wonderful relationships with the people in the community. We have big plans, more we'd like to do, and we would appreciate any support, either through prayer or through donation. If you would like to donate, you can go to shoresofgrace.com, and in the menu, click on Donate. And we just ask that you put Philly in your donation comments. Thank you.
And we are back chatting with David, who wrote The High Sign. Now, David, in the press release I got, it said, reveals 200 prophetic images and 24 dramatic events mentioned throughout the Bible. So you want to share some of those things that you found?
Yeah, and this is really not mainly in Isaiah now. Isaiah, there's a lot of stuff about the end time, but okay, give an example. The Exodus out of Egypt. If you read, I think, I'm trying to remember where it is in the New Testament, but there's a specific place where it identifies the Exodus as an allegory, because it said this is that, this is that, this is that, this is that. And of course, the Red Sea experience is like baptism. And the other things were very typological. I know we got a limited time. Maybe I could read a couple little short things from the book. Isaiah was important because it has so much to do about the end time and establishing the fact of some of the things that are going to happen. But the really biggies are Matthew 24, Luke 21, Jesus' own sermon about his return. That's the hub of it. And also there's in the Sermon on the Mount, there's some really important stuff about loving enemies, because Jesus in his sermon talks about tribulation and persecution. Well, what's that? That's enemies. And I've already seen activity like that just in the past week, where I had the counsel a woman who had experienced this real hatred because she's a Christian. So maybe I can just read a couple of these things. They're brief.
Yeah, sure. Go right ahead.
You did say in your instructions that you wanted me to read a little bit. I'm going to keep this short, but I think these are very important segments. Let's see. This is the first one. Okay. In the scriptures, in Luke 21 and Matthew 24, there are 7 points that are made about Jesus' return that helps us to identify the sign, because some of these things that are going on. Luke 21:11 talks about earthquakes, famines, and great signs from heaven. Roaring and tossing of the sea, which is Luke 21:25. Light flashing from horizon to horizon. Actually, it says lightning from horizon to horizon, Matthew 24:27. Darkened sun and moon, Matthew 24:29. Think about it. Really, it is impossible for the sun and moon to be eclipsed at the same time, with one exception. There's one way it can happen, and it is in scripture. People terrified, heavenly bodies shaken. That's Luke 21:26. Falling stars. Yeah, there's something like that. It is going to be happening. Matthew 24:29. The sign of the Son of Man, glorious and powerful. Matthew 24:30. And then the trumpet sound and heavenly gathering of the elect. Matthew 24:31. I don't want to go into all the details, but I discovered that there are 7 possibilities for if it's a celestial sign, and it apparently is, because all this stuff is up there, and Jesus is going to be seen coming on the cloud. Everything is going to be up here, and then we're going to go up there. So a lot of it points that way. But how do we know what that sign is going to be? Well, put it this way. I got it down to 7 things, and there was only one thing that turned out positive in more than 3. And that one scored 100%. And that was a comet. And I really, of course, the people terrified in the heavenly bodies shaking. Only a comet can do that. In fact, NASA, and there's a quote from NASA in here about that. Even NASA says, comet comes, we've had it. But God, if it's God's comet, he can make it do what he wants it to do. That's the big if. The one, though, that really clinched it for me, beside the fact that it was a 7-3 deal, was light flashing or lightning flashing from horizon to horizon. This is exactly the way it looks when a comet approaches and goes into orbit. You get the tail that goes all the way across, millions of mile long tail. It goes all the way across the sky. And of course, when the sun comes up, it just illuminates. And even when the sun goes down, if the tail is up there far enough, it will still, in the nighttime, illuminate what's going on up there. And it will be awesome, absolutely awesome. And it will be horizon to horizon. Anyway, that to me is the most convincing evidence in the stack that a comet will be the sign. And then you get to the NASA comet, which I mentioned before. Am I getting ahead of you now?
No, you're fine. You're fine.
Okay, right. The NASA comet, that's in here. Let's see if I can find it now. Well, I remember what it is. I'm not finding it right now, but I remember what it is. NASA, I saw this program, I turned it on TV. It was about comets. And NASA was producing and of course I was interested even at that time. This was like maybe 15 years ago. And the end of it, I'm thinking, well, they're going to say, well, we're going to nuke it. We're going to do this. We're going to do that. And instead, the guy from NASA says, there is nothing we can do. You can tell I still remember that. But he said a comet is nature's, what was the word? He's unstoppable. Well, he meant unstoppable projectile. A comet is nature's unstoppable projectile. We cannot do anything. When a comet does appear to be the sign of Jesus' return, I'm saying when, it's 100%. I mean, there's nothing else that it could be. It's going to be so scary to people who do not know the Lord. Jesus said he was going to shorten the time of tribulation. Well, I think he's going to use the comet to do that. When the comet starts to move forward, the people who are terrorizing others are going to be turning to run. And then that's going to change everything. It's going to flip-flop. Because all of a sudden the terrorists are going to be terrified. And those of us who belong to the Lord and who recognize the sign of Jesus' return, and that doesn't mean it's going to return right now, because the comet's going to orbit for years, but it's going to happen. And all of a sudden, the people who are terrified are going to be rejoicing, and the people who are the terrorists are going to be terrified. And to me, what could be greater justice than this? God's justice is perfect. He also said the destroy. This is in Jeremiah and Isaiah. He also said the destroyers will be destroyed, and the traitors will be betrayed. I mean, this is a God who we can trust. He's absolutely just. Everything he does is absolutely right. I think I'll take a breath.
I will say you can definitely tell the passion in your voice as you're talking about this, because I think a couple of times you got very choked up when you were talking about the comet coming and the tribulations that people are feeling. What are some of the things that people can be confident in? Because as I said, this is part of our Sunday inspirational series. So what can they be confident in besides if they're Christians already be confident? But what are some other ways that they know that they have the confidence?
First of all, I say read Matthew 24 and Luke 21, because in his sermon, Jesus said neat little things like, don't be afraid. Don't even worry. Because if you come like Jesus did before, a hostile tribunal, said, just stand firm. He said those words more than once. Stand firm. I will show you what to say. Or maybe there'll be nothing. But don't worry about it. I mean, he has it. We can be confident that no matter what happens, And there are going to be some terrible things. Well, people are going to be killed, but people are going to be saved also.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to be a terrible time from the standpoint of bloodshed, but it's going to be a wonderful time for eternity. Zechariah, and this is Old Testament too. Right toward the end of the Old Testament, he makes this prophecy that when this end time comes, the day of the Lord is here, he will take with him to heaven, or up to him in heaven, 1/3 of the population of the earth. Now, whether you believe in pre-trib or not,
Mm-hmm.
this is a lot of people.
Mm-hmm.
Right now, I don't think, well, no, the United States probably has the highest percentage still of Christians, and now it's about 25%. Kennedy said that less than 50% of the pastors are Christians. Of course, they of the ones who come in and to learn EE, they're going to learn how to evangelize. They're not even Christians. Billy Graham, who by the way preached at the opening of Kennedy's church, they were good friends. Billy Graham said, "What percent of Christians are actually fulfilling their potential in Christ in the United States?" And he said 3%.
Wow.
So when somebody says that 33% or 1/3 of the human beings on the face of the earth are going to be saved, well, even in the United States, there aren't that many. Some places they don't even know Christ yet. There are missions out. Well, Kennedy's EE is in every nation, but they're they don't get to everyone. They don't get to everyone. A lot of people have no idea even what Christianity is. That all I know is that from the time that they were young, they were taught to hate Christians.
Mm-hmm.
If they're communists, they're taught to hate Christians. If they're Muslims, they're taught to hate Christians. And that's one of the reasons why we can expect tribulation.
Wow. I mean, that's just, you keep saying that be not afraid and don't be discouraged. There's some like key things that have been like picked up. Like I picked up in the last couple of weeks that it's just a reconfirmation from God that these are the things that these are the things you're supposed to focus on instead of all our worries. Because I think when we tend to lay things down at God's feet, but we also tend to pick things up when we've laid them down. So let's talk about how people can just say, okay, because you already said God's got this, because God has got this. But how can we not have that tendency to pick it up?
Well, I have a tendency to pick it up. I had a really bad day. I think it's human, and we shouldn't be too hard on ourselves. In fact, I have a friend who told me, "You're too hard on yourself." We're Christians, but we still sin. We still do things and think things and that are wrong. And one of them is to get all wrapped up in negative hype and negativism. I tend to do that. I think that we can forgive ourselves and just do the best we can and trust the Lord to help us through it. That's not a very complicated solution, but prayer and Bible reading are probably the keys.
Now, is there a favorite verse besides Isaiah 6:8 that is your favorite, that's your go-to verse?
I don't know if that's my favorite, but that changed my life. Right now, I'm more interested in Matthew 24 and Luke 21 because they're relevant. He also said, Jesus said, get ready, be prepared for what's ahead. He wants us to know. He doesn't want us to be surprised. He said so many great things in that one sermon that no matter how many times you read it, you can pick up something new. And of course, the companion is the Sermon on the Mount, where he says, this is something I didn't know until recently. 2 of the Beatitudes are about the blessings of tribulation, the blessings of personal hardship and persecution, the blessings. And the most emphasized of all, the 9th one, the most wording, it talks about the blessing of suffering for Christ, of suffering. I don't think of suffering as a blessing, but if it's for him, and the disciples, after a slow start, got this right. The apostles got it right. They had a real slow start after all running. The first time when they saw Jesus was going to be killed, they took off and ran. Not just Peter, all of them. But they got it. They met together and they prayed some more, and they got it. They really did. And my understanding is that they were looking forward with anticipation to being persecuted for Jesus' sake. And that is really the right attitude. I'm not there yet. I'm not looking forward to being persecuted. But really, the scriptures do repeatedly talk about the blessings of suffering for Christ, the blessings of that. And I'm sure, when you read this, you can see it. Well, Peter, the first one to run, what happened? He comes back a few days later, more than a few, but it wasn't that long, a month later, about a month. And he preaches this sermon that the whole city hears. Mm-hmm. I didn't, I've read it enough times, but really what happened? The whole city. Well, how loud was his voice? How was he projecting? By the Spirit of God. The whole city heard. And this is the man who would just run away. He could have been taken away that minute and killed. But he was preaching loud enough, and the city was packed with people. It was one of those, one of those religious celebrations. That's when I think about it, that is preaching. There are not too many people whose voice, they didn't have microphones then. His voice was heard throughout that city, and there were people everywhere walking and talking. Man, that's awesome. But that was the Peter of faith, and it only took him a month to turn around. I'm 40 days, 50, something like that. It was Pentecost. Well, I don't remember the exact, but it was only a short time later. Yeah, Pentecost. It was 50 days later. 50 days, and this is 50 days after he's denied Christ 3 times. He's run away. So let's not be hard on ourselves. The Lord gets a hold of us. He can do wonderful things through each and every one of us, because he is God. And he can do what he wants to do. And we can trust him to do what is right every time. Every time.
So let's go back to talking about the high sign. How long did it take you to actually compile all your evidence? And because there's a lot of evidence in this, I want to say little book, but it's not a little book. All the evidence in this book, and then actually sit down and write it, because you obviously had to do a lot of research and dig into a lot of biblical, or was that along the way?
Yeah, it didn't start as being research for a book so much as just reading the Bible with the interest in the end time and the sign of Jesus' return, and all of a sudden finding events that were comet related, that comets were involved in 24 of those. I don't need to get involved in it, but the Exodus was one of them. And Sodom, that was a comet. That was definitely a comet. It was kaboom, it's come, and Sodom is gone, and there's now a gaping hole where that projectile from the comet landed. And that only a comet does that. Only a comet does that. But there are others. There was 24 of them. And as I started to see all this, at some point when I got near 24, I said, I got to write about this. This is awesome. And so many of these things, we just read through the scripture and we see these little points. But then you step back and think, well, what did blow up Sodom? Well, we find out from other history that as far away as Greece, or wasn't Greece at that time, but it was Greece at one time, that explosion was heard. I mean, this was a biggie. And the only thing that does that is the comet. Asteroids do not even have explosives. Comets when you talk about stars falling from the heaven,
Mm-hmm.
a lot of it will be this debris from the comet, the pieces of the comet coming apart because the tail comes apart and comets come apart. And when the pieces start falling on you, 1994 Jupiter, it was a comet going around Jupiter for more than 20 years. 1994, it starts breaking up. Pieces start falling for about 22, I think it was 2 weeks. And it was something like, I don't know, 14, 15, 22 pieces, something like 2 or 3 dozen pieces. And each one lands, and there's this big explosion, so big that they could see it on their telescopes. And they had, I think somebody's doing the yard. But yeah, they that's been my frustration today, the yard. But, yeah, but it's really awesome what comes. I think there's not much they can have left to do. At some point, I just said, well, I'm going to start writing this down. And when my wife, who is now deceased, when she read the book, it said, that was when I knew that I had something.
So how long did it take you to write the book?
Once I had all the materials, maybe a year, maybe not. I would say probably about a year. It is pretty long. 24 incidents are related in detail on how they're associated with comets. And then, of course, the Gideon, that was the best one. The enemies thought it was a comet because the Lord had this thing going where they break these pots. Okay, that's explosions. Oh, it's a comet. They were afraid of comets. And there was one due. In fact, it was probably in the sky at that time, only it was not really in threatening position. But the enemies who go out, and whenever a comet was around, they always went out, and the kings were hoping and praying and whatever they did, that something would happen, that they could be expanding their own kingdoms. Somebody else would get them, get the explosions, and they would move in and take over. But the way the Lord did it was he simulated the comet so that the people who could see the comet in the sky, it was pretty, it wasn't real close, but it was close enough so they could be afraid of it. And they had known what comets had done for every so many years. I think it was every 53 years there was a bad comet. So they were expecting it. And then the explosions, and then there was the torches. Oh no! And if you read it carefully, they came down the mountainsides carrying the torches. So it looked like that this fire was descending, and these enemy troops are by this time scared to death. The pots and the fire. What was the other? What was the other? There was one other element that made them think this is a comet, and they panicked, and they started to run. The only direction they could was south because it was a mountain on this side, a river on that side, or something like that. And they started killing each other, and before it was over, they had killed most of each other, the enemies. And God's people didn't even have weapons; they just had pots and torches. There was one other thing. I'm not remembering everything right now. But the Lord is smart. He's not only just, but he's smart. He reduced the number of people who were participating to 300. He said, well, we got too many people. And I'm sure that it's going to be 300 against umpteen thousand. And the Lord said, yeah. And then he said, this is what I want you to do. And as far as I know, not a single one of them was killed.
Wow. Just the amazing thing that God can do, that God can use and change anything and make anything appear the way he wants it to appear and use that for his good. I mean, I think one of my favorite verses is, I can't remember exactly where it is. I think it's in Genesis. It's where Joseph and his brothers are there and everything. It's at the very end. It's just what the devil meant for bad, God made it for good. That summarized that. That's one of my favorite verses, because when you're going through all the trials and tribulations, you can't see over on the other side. You just have to have faith that you're going to get there.
Yeah, you're talking about Joseph now, right? He turned it to good for saving many people. That last part I like too, because he's still saving many people, maybe not always just physically, but spiritually. He's still saving many people.
Yep.
Yeah, I like that one too.
So what is up next for you? Are you have any more books in you, or do you think this is it?
Actually, I've had 6 end time books. There is one. This is a new one. It just came out this past week, and the way I like to describe them is that the high sign is what to expect, and end time living is how to react.
Oh.
Now there is some reaction at the end of the high sign, but it's a very small part. The evidential stuff is mostly what's in the high sign, not only for the sign of his return, but for a couple other points. But this one is about, okay, now what does Jesus want us to do? How does he want us to behave? And of course, we've talked a little bit about being not afraid and standing firm. Those are biggies. And getting ready. Those are big. But there's more detail. And I think the most important one, and this comes from his Sermon on the Mount, is loving your enemies. And Richard Wurmbrand and Watchman Nee, two of the great Christians of our time, that both had the same kind of experiences. The communists put them in jail and they tortured them. And before it was over, the communists were getting saved left and right. So they had to, let these guys go, because we don't want them around our. That's literally true. There were so many people getting saved in the prison camps, the torturers, that they didn't know what to do. That they didn't. Nee and Wurmbrand were pretty well known. They didn't want to just kill them, but they tortured them. And Nee and Wurmbrand just smiled and said, "Praise God. Let me tell you about Jesus." And wow,
Yeah, that faith is wow. You're right. That's
But that's God. That's humanly impossible. That is God. That's the whole period of God doing that.
Yeah, that is so true. Now our time is almost up. Do you have like one last little nugget that you want to share with people? Some kind of quote or inspiration that you would like to share with people?
Yes. Yeah. This I like. It's from, and it'll take a minute to read if it's okay.
That's fine.
It's okay?
Yes, that's good.
Jonathan Cahn wrote this. A Messianic believer, great faith. And it's a no fear God. He wrote, "If America was consciously trying to provoke God's judgment, it could hardly do more than it is doing now. Some of the signs in the biblical template of a nation heading to judgment include societal division, civil unrest, disorder, sexual immorality, violence, the overturning of its moral foundation, the abolition of gods. And he describes in 2 Thessalonians 2:3 a great falling away. All these things are now coming to pass. We are living in the days of prophecy." 2 more paragraphs. "Is this cause to fear? Just the opposite. It is cause for encouragement and power. The very fact that God told us of these things before they occurred tells us that God is still very much in control and very much on the throne. The truth is, it is the greatest privilege and the highest honor to have been chosen to witness these things and to live in such a time as this. Let us live in a manner worthy of such a high honor. Be strong and of good courage. Go all out for God, faithful, immovable, bold, and strong in the power of his might." What time is it? It's your time to stand. Now go and light up the world.
Wow.
I love that.
Wow. So tell people where they can find more about what your writings.
I recently I recently lost one of my social things. Somebody actually stole it. But I do have a website. It's www.endtimesmystery.com. I can be reached there. My books, and I think they're less expensive there than on Amazon. But you can. There's a display of several books that might be interesting to someone. But right now I'd suggest the high sign, and end time living as the two that are the meat of it. And you can find that on the website.
I love that. That are the meat of it. It boils down to everything. Even though the high sign was kind of thick, as you can see, the end time living, the one you just picked up just a few minutes ago, is thinner than this one. So do you think it's because this one's maybe a little bit, I say it's short because it's a smaller book than what normal books are?
Yeah, actually, the publisher, this one is a little bit larger, but the version of the high sign that's the latest of them is the same size. See, this one originally was published by another publisher. The publisher went out of business, so it was not publicized. And one that was being sold secondhand on the internet was being asked $1,700 because there was only a few of them in print, and the others had, because I got sick, the publisher went out, so there was only a few of them in print. So this is a new edition. Actually, I think this is one of that particular edition because there were a few more than they thought. But yeah, the publisher I have now prints them all the same size. All of the end time books are the same size, I think the 5x8. And the end time living is much shorter text, but I think that especially the part of it about the Song of Songs with Solomon and his lover, that's beautiful. I recommend them both. My wife liked the high sign, and she's probably right. It's probably the best, most important.
I love that. So, David, I want to thank you for coming on and sharing about the high sign and sharing what you found when you've been studying the biblical truths with other people, because I think people need to be aware. And I love also the fact that you said, you're guilty of dropping it at God's feet and then picking it back up too. So it shows that we're all the same no matter what.
Yes.
So thank you, David, for sharing your time with us today. And guys, I will put where you can find David at, as well as where you can find the books. The High Sign is the book that we're talking about, but I highly recommend this book because it does have a lot of, especially if you're really big into trying to delve into what the Bible is telling. But I would recommend reading this as a supplement to the Bible. I would never say read this book and not the Bible first, because you definitely have to read the Bible.
Absolutely. I would say the same thing. I would agree.
Because
that's where most of it comes from.
Mm-hmm. You have to be
exposition of some of that stuff in the Bible.
Yeah. You have to be in the God's word to really know what exactly is going on. So as always, I want you guys to be blessed, and most importantly, keep chatting with each other and have a great day. And once again, David, thank you for coming on. And I can't wait to dig into the second book as well. So have a great day, David.
Well, thank you, Melissa.